My name is Eleanor Carter, and I am 67 years old. I live in Columbus in the brick house I bought the year Julia took her first steps. On a Tuesday at 3:12, my phone buzzed as chamomile steam curled from a mug. I wiped my hands, glanced at the screen, and pressed play. Julia's voice filled my kitchen, low and urgent, like she was talking while a car turned. Dan, I cannot do this with her anymore. I am serious. My mother is everywhere, asking, moving things, second-guessing me. This house will never feel like ours until she is gone. A blinker clicked. Then the sentence that split the floor under my feet. I spoke to a place on the north side. $900 a month if we sign this week. They can say she needs supervision. I gripped the counter to steady the trimmer in my hands. The girl who once slept on my chest during thunderstorms was now pricing my life like a utility bill. Julia kept talking. Martin says the deed is easy. It is still in her name. But we add guardianship language and slide it through. She will not see it. She forgets things anyway. I did not forget this. I stood still and listened to my breath. Behind her, Daniel murmured, using the brisk voice he saves for decisions. With the house, we clear the cards and finally redo the kitchen. My house. My kitchen. My years of penny jars and second shifts flattened into a backsplash. I replayed the message once, then again, each time loosening another knot I had tied to keep faith. I saw Saturdays mopping hospital corridors so Julia could buy textbooks. I saw the winter I sold my mother's locket so she could fly to an interview. I saw myself at her graduation, clapping until my palms stung while she promised I would never struggle again. I never kept a ledger. Betrayal keeps one for you. The audio closed like a door. It will be smooth if we tell her there is a doctor appointment, Julia said. By the time she understands, the papers will be filed. The first wave was grief, hot and blinding. The second was quiet. That quiet gathered into a line of thought so clear I could taste it. If they believed I was confused, then confusion could be a curtain. If they planned a script for me, I would write the next scene. I rinsed the cup and set it upside down to dry. In my bedroom, I opened the cedar box that holds the bones of my life and laid out my proofs. Birth certificate, mortgage release, insurance binder, a notebook with a red ribbon. I chose the crimson suit I wore to Julia's college graduation and draped it across the chair. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and let the quiet harden into resolve. At dawn, I would leave, and I would not go alone. I was born on the south side of Columbus, in a one-bedroom apartment that smelled of boiled potatoes and soap. My father died when I was 9, and from then on, my mother stitched clothes until her fingers bled. She used to tell me, Eleanor, you give until it hurts, because family is all we have. I took those words as scripture. When I was 18, I met Robert Carter, a charming boy with a dimpled grin who swore we would marry before winter. He disappeared by summer, leaving me with a swelling belly and a house full of unanswered questions. His parents shut their door in my face. I remember standing in their driveway, shoes soaked from rain, one hand on my stomach, the other pounding on wood that never opened. Julia came into this world with a cry so strong it startled the nurse. I thought, if I can give her everything, maybe she will never feel abandoned. I was 19, scrubbing hospital floors by night, feeding her mashed carrots by day, and falling asleep with the smell of disinfectant on my skin. My paychecks barely covered formula and rent, but I refused to let her know hunger. On weekends, I ironed uniforms for neighbors. On holidays, I worked double shifts while the other staff gathered with their families. Every extra dollar went into a jar labeled Julia's future. I will never forget her first day of kindergarten. She wore a thrift store dress I had ironed 3 times to hide the wear. We walked because bus fare was too much. The other mothers stepped out of shiny cars in heels and perfume. I stood there in my faded coat, hands cracked from bleach, and I felt so small. But then Julia kissed me and whispered, "Thank you, Mommy. You're the best." The ache in my chest became pride. When she turned 15, I worked 6 straight months of extra shifts to give her a proper quinceañera. I spent $4. Zero money. I had been saving to patch the roof, but I watched her whirl in a golden dress under sparkling lights. And I told myself it was worth every cent. She hugged me, saying, "One day, I'll give this back to you 1,000 times over." College came, and with it tuition bills that could choke a banker. Ohio Valley University charged $16. 000 a year. Far more than I earned. But mothers don't calculate odds. I pawned my mother's ring, sold the sewing machine that had clothed us for years, and took out a loan against the house. I signed those papers with shaking hands, thinking of the roof over our heads, but also of Julia's future. I worked myself to the bone those 4 years. Julia always had new books, polished shoes, a laptop like the other students. I ate oatmeal for dinner and told her I wasn't hungry. When she graduated, cap and gown swaying as she walked across the stage, tears blurred my vision. She hugged me and said, "This is our victory. Mom, you'll never have to clean again." And for a while, I believed her. Julia found a job in an insurance firm. She married Daniel, who looked reliable in his pressed shirts and careful smile. They promised me Sunday dinners and grandchildren running through the yard. I clung to that vision, the reward for years of sacrifice. But promises, I would learn, can vanish faster than the shine on a borrowed dress. At first, life seemed steady. Julia and Daniel came for Sunday dinners, bringing me flowers from the farmer's market and promising they would never let me feel alone. For a while, I believed the rhythm would hold. Then Daniel lost his job at the accounting firm. "It's just temporary, Mom," Julia said over the phone, her voice brisk. "But we could use some help covering rent this month." I wired them $1, $200 without hesitation. Then it became $2. 000 for a car payment. $3. 500 for overdue credit cards. Each time I told myself, this is what mothers do. But a whisper inside me asked, how much longer can you bleed? 3 months later, Julia suggested they move in just until we're back on our feet. I welcomed them, imagining laughter at the dinner table again. But from the first night, my house felt different. Daniel complained that my television was outdated, the Wi-Fi too slow, the plumbing weak. Julia reorganized the kitchen without asking, pushing my mother's china into a box labeled "Donate." Slowly, they claimed the space. Daniel sat in my father's old chair, as if it had always been his. Julia redecorated the living room with curtains, she said, were more modern. My photographs ended up in the attic. I told myself it was temporary. Then the whispers began. I would hear them in the kitchen late at night, their voices hushed. When I entered, silence would fall, and Julia would smile too quickly. We were just talking about groceries. Mom, she'd say. My skin prickled with unease. A week later, Julia suggested she take over my bills. You shouldn't stress about utilities at your age. Let me help. She sounded caring, but the look in her eyes was calculating. Soon, she was reviewing my bank statements. Why do you withdraw so much cash? Mom, she asked sharply when she saw ID taken out $200. I brushed it off, but a knot grew in my chest. Then came the strangers. A man in a white coat introduced himself as a geriatric specialist. Just routine, Julia explained. We want to make sure you're healthy. Another week, a social worker knocked on my door, clipboard in hand. "We've had reports about possible confusion," she said gently. I stood frozen, realizing my own daughter had planted those lies. The cruelest moment came when Julia spoke in front of my longtime friend. "Helen." "Oh, Mom's been so forgetful lately," she said with a sympathetic smile. "Yesterday, she tried to make coffee at midnight because she thought it was morning." I hadn't, but I saw Helen's eyes soften with pity. That was the day I understood Julia was building a case against me, brick by brick, in the court of public opinion. My home was no longer mine. My independence was shrinking like a candle guttering in the wind. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning of their plan. It happened on a rainy Thursday when the sky pressed low over Columbus. I had baked a pineapple cake, Daniel's favorite, and carried it into the kitchen where Julia sat with her cousin Martin. Papers were spread across the table like playing cards. The moment I stepped in, Martin snapped them into a folder. "Mom, what a surprise," Julia said with a smile that never reached her eyes. "We were just organizing some insurance forms for Daniel." But in the instant before the folder closed, I saw my own name typed in bold across the top of a document. My breath caught. "Why is my name on your papers?" I asked. They exchanged a glance so fast it was almost invisible. "Just routine," Julia said, her voice too smooth. "Beneficiaries. In case something happens to us." I nodded slowly, though every instinct screamed that it was a lie. From then on, the air in my own home grew heavier. Conversations stopped when I walked into a room. Bills went missing from the counter, and Julia's concern for my memory sharpened into accusations. The final blow came with the voice message. Hearing my daughter call me a nuisance, hearing her discuss with Daniel how easily they could trick me into a care home, felt like knives twisting in my chest. She even laughed about the kitchen remodel they would do once I was gone. That night, I walked the halls of my house in silence. Each photograph on the wall told a story of sacrifice. Christmas mornings, when I bought her the doll she wanted, though it meant no heat bill paid. Birthdays, when I sewed dresses by hand because there was no money for new ones. The graduation photo, where my hands clapped until they stung. I had poured decades of love into this child, only to hear her plan my erasure as casually as ordering takeout. I sat on the living room floor and wept until my throat burned. But somewhere between one sob and the next, something shifted. The tears dried, replaced by a cold, clean determination. If Julia thought I was too old, too weak, too confused to fight, she was about to discover the steel in the woman who raised her. I stood, went to my bedroom, and opened the cedar chest where I kept my most precious things. Birth certificate, deed, insurance policy, old notebooks full of numbers and dates. I laid them out like soldiers on parade. These would be my weapons. Then I reached into the back of the closet and pulled out the crimson suit I hadn't worn since Julia's college graduation. I pressed it smooth with my hands. In the mirror, I imagined myself not as a victim, but as a general preparing for war. That night, I did not sleep. At dawn, I dressed carefully, pinned on my mother's pearl earrings, and placed every important document in my leather bag. I left a short note on the kitchen table, gone out for errands. Back later? Love. Mom. When I stepped out into the gray morning, the chill air filled my lungs like fire. My enemies were under my roof, but they had no idea the woman they had dismissed as fragile was walking into battle. And this time, I intended to win. The streets of Columbus were still wet from the night's rain when I arrived at Franklin Savings, the bank where I had kept my accounts for 20 years. Nora, the branch manager, greeted me with a warm smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter. What can I do for you today?" I steadied my voice. "Nora, I need to review every transaction from the last 6 months, and I want to see if anyone has accessed my accounts besides me." She frowned, tapped at her keyboard. and her expression hardened. That's odd. We have multiple inquiries from your daughter. Julia, she presented a signed authorization from you. My stomach twisted. I never signed anything, I said, my voice sharp. Nora slid a scanned document across the counter. The signature slanted upward, clumsy, as if someone had copied mine from an old birthday card. This is a forgery, I said, laying my driver's license next to it. See the difference in the loop of the C? That's not me. Her eyes widened. Mrs. Beck. Carter, this is serious. Well, revoke every authorization immediately. But I recommend filing a fraud report. That's exactly what I plan to do, I replied. But first, I need to protect what's mine. Within an hour, I had transferred all $9, 200 of my savings, into a brand new account under a fresh number. I changed every password. I named the Columbus Senior Foundation as the new beneficiary of my life insurance policy. Julia and Daniel were erased from my financial future with a few strokes of a pen. From the bank, I headed straight downtown to the Franklin County Clerk's office, where Martin worked. My pulse pounded as I walked through the heavy glass doors. Martin's eyes widened when he saw me. Aunt Eleanor, he stammered. I didn't know you were coming. I set my purse on his desk and smiled sweetly. I thought I'd check on some paperwork Julia said you were helping her with. His hands twitched over a stack of documents. Oh, it's nothing. Just some updates. Don't lie to me, Martin. I cut in, leaning closer. I know about the forged reports, the guardianship papers, the plan to transfer my house. I heard it all in Julia's voice message. His face drained of color. I slipped my phone from my purse and pressed play. Julia's cold voice spilled into the air. Martin says the deed is easy. Well, slip it through. Martin's shoulders sagged. Please, Aunt Eleanor, don't report me. I have kids. Then tell me everything, I said, my voice firm. For nearly an hour, he confessed how Julia pressured him to create false guardianship papers, how he paid a doctor to sign a fraudulent evaluation claiming I was confused and unfit, how they planned to file the property transfer within 2 weeks. I recorded every word. When he finished, I looked him straight in the eye. You will reverse every document you filed. You will give me copies of everything. And then you will start looking for a new job. If you do this, I won't press charges today. His hands shook as he slid a folder across the desk. Inside were copies of the fraudulent deeds, forged signatures, and falsified medical reports. I tucked them carefully into my bag. Walking out of the clerk's office, I felt lighter than I had in months. I was no longer just a mother betrayed. I was a woman armed with evidence, ready to strike back. My next stop was the office of Attorney Donovan. And this time, I would not be asking for advice. I would be demanding justice. Attorney Donovan arrived at my house the next morning at precisely 10 o'clock, his leather briefcase tucked under one arm. 2 uniformed officers followed him inside, along with a notary who looked grim and businesslike. Julia and Daniel were sprawled on the sofa, sipping coffee as if they owned the place. Mom, what's all this? Julia asked, her eyes darting nervously. Sit down, I told her, my voice calm but firm. We need to talk. Attorney Donovan cleared his throat. Julia Reeves and Mr. Embad. Daniel Reeves. I am here on behalf of Mrs. Eleanor Carter. We have gathered evidence of attempted fraud, falsification of documents, and conspiracy to illegally obtain her property. Daniel barked a laugh. This is ridiculous. You can't just throw around accusations. Oh, but we can, Donovan said smoothly, opening his briefcase. He laid out copies of the forged guardianship papers, the falsified medical evaluations, and the deed transfer Martin had prepared. All of this was obtained with your knowledge and participation. Julia's face paled. That's not true. Mom asked us to help with her accounts. She's been so forgetful lately. Stop lying. I cut in, pulling out my phone. I pressed play, and the room filled with Julia's voice. Dan. I can't take having my mother here anymore, Martin says. The deed is easy. Well, slip it through. Julia lunged for the phone, but one of the officers stepped between us. Her face crumpled as her own words betrayed her. This is a setup, Daniel snapped, sweat beading on his forehead. You doctored that recording. Attorney Donovan smiled thinly. If that's the story you'd like to tell a judge, be my guest. But we also have a signed confession from your cousin Martin, detailing every step of your plan. He admits to forging documents under your instruction. Julia's mouth fell open. Martin betrayed us? I leaned forward, my eyes fixed on hers. No, Julia, you betrayed yourself. And me. Donovan pulled out one final document. Here is a certified psychological evaluation from Dr. Raymond Harris, conducted yesterday. It proves Mrs. Tin, Carter, is of sound mind, more capable than most her age. Every false medical report you filed collapses under this lash. Julia's composure shattered. She began to sob, her hands shaking. Mom, please, we were desperate. We didn't mean to hurt you. Didn't mean to? I snapped, my voice rising for the first time. You planned to lock me in a home and steal the roof over my head. You laughed about it. Daniel stood, his jaw tight. You can't ruin our lives over one mistake. I rose too, meeting his glare without flinching. This wasn't a mistake. It was a crime. The officer nearest to me turned. Mrs. Carter, do you wish to proceed with arrests? I looked at Julia, my only child, the girl I had raised with every ounce of my strength. Her tears slid down her cheeks, but her eyes still held defiance. Yes, I said at last, my voice steady. Proceed. And as the handcuffs clicked around their wrists, I felt the first breath of freedom in months. The silence after Julia and Daniel were led away was heavier than any storm. I sat alone in my living room, staring at the empty sofa where they had plotted my erasure. For the first time in months, I could breathe without feeling watched. But peace did not last long. 2 days later, the story broke in the Columbus Dispatch. Daughter plotted to steal mother's home. Arrested in fraud case. My name was printed in black ink, alongside their mugshots. Neighbors I had known for decades brought casseroles and hugs, whispering words of sympathy. But for Julia and Daniel, the city turned cold. Daniel's employer, a regional tax firm, issued a statement suspending him indefinitely. If he can betray his own family, his supervisor told reporters, how can clients trust him with their accounts? Julia fared no better. Her insurance company demoted her from team lead to clerical staff, citing loss of professional credibility. But that was only the beginning. During Donovan's investigation, we unearthed records Julia and Daniel thought buried, years of falsified tax returns. Daniel had been running side jobs in cash. Julia had been selling insurance packages online without declaring the commissions. Donovan raised an eyebrow when he saw the files. Eleanor, he said, this is something the IRS would love to review. I nodded. Then let's give it to them. Within a month, Julia and Daniel faced an audit. The IRS found they owed $27. 0 inches, unpaid taxes, plus penalties that ballooned the debt to $40. 000. To avoid criminal charges, they sold their SUV, pawned jewelry, and took out loans at crushing interest. Their once comfortable life evaporated overnight. Meanwhile, Martin's cooperation saved him from prison, but not from ruin. He was fired from the county clerk's office. His name blacklisted. His confession helped expose a ring of officials who had been preying on the elderly. Headlines screamed of 12 senior properties targeted in forgery scheme. Arrests followed. The scandal rippled across Columbus, shaking trust in public offices. For me, the most powerful twist came from a choice of my own. Sitting across from Donovan one evening, I said, "I don't want Julia and Daniel to ever see this house as their prize." "What do you mean?" he asked. "I want it sold," I said. "And I want the money to serve someone who truly needs it." Within weeks, the house sold for $482. 000. I took the proceeds, along with the damages I had won in court, and donated the bulk to the Columbus Senior Foundation, the same group that had once comforted me during a dark season of grief. When the sale closed, Julia called me from an unknown number, her voice thick with rage. "You had no right," she screamed. "That house should have been mine." I listened, silent, until she was breathless. Then I answered softly, "No, Julia, that house was never yours. It was built by my hands, brick by brick, and I chose to give it to those who will honor it." She cursed me, but the words fell flat. For the first time, I realized I no longer feared her anger. The battle was over, but my life was only beginning again. When the last box left my old house, I stood in the empty doorway, my hand resting on the frame. Memories flickered across every wall. Julia's first steps on the hardwood, birthday cakes with too many candles, the sound of my mother's sewing machine in the back room. But what had once been a sanctuary had turned into a battlefield. Letting it go felt less like loss and more like release. I moved into a bright 2-bedroom apartment in a senior community on the east side of Columbus. The place had gardens where roses bloomed thick with fragrance, a recreation hall where laughter echoed, and neighbors who knew what it meant to value independence. For the first time in decades, I woke up without dread pressing on my chest. My mornings began with coffee on the balcony, watching the sun climb over maple trees. I filled my days with things I had long denied myself. I joined a painting class and discovered I could capture the way light touched water. My landscape sold at the local art fair, not for much, but enough to remind me I still had something to offer. I took line dancing lessons with my neighbor, Marie, who laughed like a girl though she was 72. And every Tuesday, I volunteered at the Columbus Senior Foundation, the same organization I had chosen to inherit my estate. There, I listened to stories that mirrored my own. Mr. Jameson, whose son had drained his savings while promising to pay him back. Mrs. Prized. Alvarez, whose daughter forged her signature on loan documents. Each time I shared my story, their eyes widened. "You fought back?" they would ask. And I would nod, saying, "Yes, and so can you." Age doesn't erase our rights. It sharpens them if we let it. Word spread. Soon I was asked to speak at community gatherings, teaching others how to safeguard their assets, how to spot the signs of manipulation. Every time I stepped to a podium, I felt the weight of my mother's words echo in my heart. Family is sacred, but dignity is non-negotiable. One quiet afternoon, 6 months after the trial, a letter slipped under my door. The handwriting was Julia's. My hands shook as I opened it. "Mom," it began, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. Therapy has forced me to face myself. I used you. I loved money more than I loved you. I lost the best mother in the world because of greed. Please don't answer this letter. Just know that I am sorry." Tears blurred the words. For a moment, I felt the old ache, the urge to run to her, to hold her as I once did when she scraped her knee. But then I folded the letter and set it inside my journal. Forgiveness lived in my heart, but trust was gone forever. Some bridges, once burned, Light the path forward rather than backward. I built my own family from the friends around me. Marie, who checked on me every morning. Nora, the retired teacher who proofread my speeches. Mr. Tonixed. Franklin, who grew tomatoes and insisted I take half. They gave me something, Julia, and Daniel never could respect without condition. One evening, as twilight painted the gardens gold, I gathered with them for dinner. We clinked glasses of cheap wine and toasted to resilience. I looked around the table, feeling fuller than I had in years. And that is when I understood the true lesson of my journey. Blood may tie us to people, but it is respect and love that make them family. Sacrifice without boundaries only teaches others to take. True love never seeks to control or destroy it, protects, it uplifts, it honors. To anyone listening, remember this: age does not make you weak. And being a parent does not mean being a victim. You have the right to defend your dignity, even against those you raised. And if you ever find yourself betrayed, know that it is never too late to choose freedom over fear, truth over lies, and self-respect over manipulation. This is my story, told with the hope that it gives you courage for your own battles. Tell me, what lesson do you take from it? And from what city are you listening today? I would love to know how far my voice travels, and how many hearts it may help heal. When I look back on everything that happened, I realize the greatest lesson of my life came from the deepest wound. For years, I believed sacrifice alone could guarantee love. But I learned that love without respect is no love at all. Family should protect you, not strip you of your dignity. What Julia and Daniel tried to do nearly broke me, but it also awakened the strength I didn't know I still had. Age does not make us helpless, it makes us wiser. And sometimes courage means standing up even to those closest to us. I chose to defend myself, not with anger, but with truth, with law, and with dignity. And that decision gave me back my freedom. Now I want to ask you, what lesson do you take from my story? And from what city are you watching today? Share your thoughts with me in the comments.